is um, is not the normal shiur in which we're teaching a subject, but as um, I thought it's an opportunity to take everything that we have learned and sort of bring it down to a practical level and also basically answer questions, give you an opportunity to ask things that were not clear to you or specific questions. Um, and this is not a chat TPT session. In other words, I will be trying to answer and give you an in-depth understanding of what is behind some of the questions or answers that you have brought forward, and see perhaps um, what is lacking in understanding, or a deeper understanding of something. So if you want to take all of the questions, that some of them are very good, and send them to ChatGPT and then see how well I did, you are welcome to do so. And you can give me some points at the end. Give me, but I'm joking, but I mean that these are complex questions, which is exactly why I asked you to send some questions, and I'll do my best to go through them. Um, and some of them are interconnected. And of course, this just also stresses the fact that it's very important that you have a good connection with your local community rabbi, so that you can ask these type of questions on a practical level. And it could be that different circumstances are different, and the answers will be different accordingly as well, because halakha should be personal. It's not only a system, it's also something personal, that is something that depends on the situation. In the same way that I really hope that someone is not asking for medical advice from and looking it up on Google. You need your own physician who will give you the advice for you that is right for you. Otherwise, you can end up taking two medicines that contradict each other, and that would be a catastrophe. So in the same way, we have a path, and we have the laws of halakha, and within that we have the guidance of the local rabbi who understands the local circumstances. So what we're doing here is maybe at a Nordic level, but of course it's much better to do it at your own level with your own rabbi, um, in within your own community. So one um, and you're very welcome to in the future also. This isn't the only opportunity to ask these questions. But let us go forward, because we don't have, let's see how we do on these questions. So one an earlier question that came out at the beginning. I would like to clarify what is muktzeh and what is not, because that is a general question that different questions are connected to. And I know that Rav Yair, when he was teaching Muktzeh, didn't have, I mean, you can teach Muktzeh you have an entire book on Muktzeh. So you can, it's very difficult. But the word Muktzeh is very specific regarding a specific prohibition on Shabbat. So let's start from that. What is muktzeh? Muktzeh means something that I cannot touch or move, because the use of it is prohibited on the Shabbat. Okay, that means um, that it doesn't mean I've done something wrong. And that's where, but I still cannot move it, even if I've done something right. An example is Shabbat candles or an electric light. Okay, the fact is that I can, of course, light Shabbat candles on my table before Shabbat begins, but I cannot move them afterwards. Why is that the case? Because I have the halachic criteria. It's called kli shemelachto le'isu. It's a vessel that has been used for something prohibited. So I cannot. So the candles being lit is not a problem itself, but I cannot move the candles after, or the tray itself that was holding even the candles, even after the candles have gone out. If I have another example, would be electric light, electricity itself. I'm not allowed to turn on the Shabbat. I actually saw this in Malmö at the last Shabbaton that we had, which is problematic, and I will bring it up to the community. They have these small electric lights that they are just like for fancy, for decoration, that they put on the tables to make it nice for the Shabbat dinner. Um, that in itself is not problematic. You turn them on before Shabbat and you turn them off after. But if you're going to be resetting the tables or taking off the tablecloths, then you're going to be moving them, and that is called muktzeh. Muktzeh is only used for this term. It's not used for anything else. You can't do a muktzeh, and you can't, you don't say it is a muktzeh to light a fire on Shabbat. That is a term that is sometimes used wrongly. Muktzeh is a specific term used for something which I'm not allowed to use on the Shabbat, and therefore I'm not allowed to move it from one place to another. This can be a pencil, for example, or a pen, because I'm not allowed to write on the Shabbat. Therefore, that becomes something which I am not, which should be set aside. The word muktzah means to be set aside. It should be set aside before the Shabbat, because I'm not going to be using it on the Shabbat. Last week we talked about the eruv, that we have a very specific area, right, in which the Torah tells us, Al yetze ish mimkomo b'yom hashvi, that you're not allowed to leave a certain parameter, what is considered your space in the Shabbat. In the same notion, when we begin the Shabbat, we already have set aside everything that we need for the Shabbat and everything that we don't need for the Shabbat. So that anything which is prohibited to use on the Shabbat, we will also not engage with on the Shabbat. Interesting questions that come forward in terms of this is, what if I have electric toys, for example, right? So if the toys are being used shouldn't be used by by a child on Shabbat because it's electric, and they shouldn't be playing with it. Simple solution is to take the battery out before Shabbat, if it's simple to do so, right? And then that becomes permissible. But once the toy itself still has a battery inside, it is not allowed to be used, then that itself would become muktzeh. An electric toothbrush would be muktzeh as well, right? Because we can't use it on Shabbat because of the electricity in it, and therefore the fact that it's not usable makes it muktzeh. Regarding children and toys, I think it's important to have an educational vision when we speak about this, but maybe it's true in general as well. If we spend the entire Shabbat running after our kids saying, no, it's not allowed, you can't do this, this is muktzeh, we end up with the kids' idea of Shabbat being, this is not allowed and this is prohibited. When we think educationally what we want to reach, that's not where we want to go, right? We want to end up when the child is bar or bat mitzvah, in the sense that they have a deep appreciation and connection to the Shabbat. So if their entire Shabbat is don't do this and don't do this, it's better that they do it and not know that it's not allowed, and then they learn that over time, than the opposite. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, because it's many times what I said is right. It's not. I'm gonna say it again. Right. It's better that over time someone learns the true meaning of Shabbat and how to keep it properly, than to run after someone and all the time say, "Oh, it's not allowed. It's not allowed. It's not allowed." I think the same would be true for those in a conversion process, that over time you build up what your Shabbat looks like in a deep understanding of what is and what should not be. Okay? But it's not that, but if I start off with, this is not allowed, this is not allowed, this I can't do, this I can't do, then I'm not going to end up creating a proper Shabbat for myself. Okay, so it has to be a process, and also the fact that someone who's in a conversion process, at the very beginning, there's no expectation that you keep the Shabbat fully. So take that advantage, and over time, until you're in a place in which it makes sense for you, and that it's set properly. That being said, okay, and I hope I've clarified Mukte for you. Then that being said, I'm going to go forward to some other questions, and again, I'm giving a background answer, and then we can see. I can go through the questions and see if I've answered them, or you can tell me if you still have questions. So, Shabbat, the last thing that we do on Shabbat, right, when we finish the Shabbat, is Havdalah. The first thing we do is Kiddush. Kiddush means to sanctify and to make something holy. Havdalah means to separate. This means that Shabbat is separated and sanctified from the rest of the week. It means that I have to, if I want to properly keep the Shabbat, I can't try to make it work as if it's a normal day. And that becomes especially tricky when one is living alone or living in a secular society. Okay? And that's where some of your questions come forward. And then one has to make a decision whether it's actually not the right thing to try to make something work. I think that when I hear from people, for example, that they're keeping Shabbat but living in an apartment with someone non-Jewish, and that they go into their room and keep Shabbat, and the other one is watching the TV in the living room, I think that it's very problematic. Not because you're doing something wrong, because you're not doing something right. Shabbat, you need to have a proper atmosphere in order to feel what Shabbat really means. And just to make it do or say, I'm not going to prohibit the Shabbat, but what about all you're supposed to be doing? And then in that sense, that's why community is extremely important. Um, Judaism, we cannot live on on our own in our own little apartment and think that we can do Shabbat properly. It's about community and also the community atmosphere. Anyone who has had a Shabbat dinner or meal with other people keeping Shabbat, realizes that it's completely different. If you've had Shabbat with your rabbi, if you've had Shabbat with the community, that's completely different, and that's something that you need to strive to build up for yourselves. And that can be done with a few friends. But it won't be easy to do that if you're having a secular or non-Jewish person over for a birthday party on the Shabbat. It's not going to work. In other words, you can do everything right or try to make it work, but there's a clash in what you're trying to achieve, which is to try to have a proper Shabbat atmosphere and kedusha and holiness and singing and everything that you've seen in the community. And then when you try to do it at home, and then you have non-Jewish friends over, and then you tell them, please turn your phones off, or even secular friends, turn off your phones, don't do this, I'm trying to keep the Shabbat. Oh, well, you can do that. It's not, you have to try to think, how do I positively create the Shabbat in the way that it should be? And then maybe in such a case, it's better not to try to make it work. That you have a birthday party on the Shabbat, or you can say, oh, is it okay for me to go to a birthday party on the Shabbat at a friend's home, and I'm not going to be prohibiting the Shabbat? I think that in itself is, again, it's your own process, but I'm trying to say where we end up, is that in itself is not sustainable. Because even if you're not violating the Shabbat in itself, you're definitely in an atmosphere which is not respecting the Shabbat. And therefore, imagine, okay, you go into the apartment, you tell your friend, when I show up downstairs, just ring the bell because open the door for me because I can't. And then you go upstairs and they have, food that has been set aside, and then, etc., etc. They have music on, but you're not listening to the music. It really means that separation is not being made clear enough in order for you to be able to enjoy. You're going to be all of the time dealing with being stressed out that, am I keeping the Shabbat properly? Am I not keeping the Shabbat? I'll give you a completely different example about separation, because the Torah tells us, use the word Havdalah. The Torah tells us, V'ivdalti otchem min ha'amim. I've separated you from the nations. So one can find ways to make kosher work even outside of Israel, right? And we have the kosher lists, and you've all, learned how to keep a kosher home. But then what happens when we are outside, and what does it mean to separate? So I'll give you an example that happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was in it was I was invited to a non-Jewish home, quite spontaneously, and it was actually some people from Saudi Arabia, and they had invited me, and they went to a huge effort, and they had their chef make this whole meal before I arrived. And then I arrived, and I basically can't eat anything. And I think that, solution-wise, I can usually figure out what to do if I'm in a situation before. But afterwards, it becomes quite problematic. So what do I do? They prepared a meal for me in non-kosher utensils and set them aside and really wanted to respect me, right? Which is, right, because it's very important for them to respect their guests. What do I do in such a situation? So it could be that, I could say, what can I do? I have to eat. It's going to insult them. But no, I can't eat non-kosher food. So what do we do? So I ended up in such a situation which was not planned. And I basically had to say to them, could you imagine? I said, of course, I deeply respect you and thank you so much for respecting me and for preparing this meal for me. However, just imagine if you were in the same situation and there was pork that it was being served to you. What would you do? So for me, even though you don't understand it, this is the same for me. So I deeply respect, and I'd love it if you have some fresh fruit and we can have some tea or coffee together. But I think at the end, I was afraid that I would insult them. At the end, we ended up with more appreciation because they understood it, but also because I was communicative towards them and explaining to them in a way that they can understand. And I think that that's very important when we also talk about the Shabbat and the fact that many of you have relations, even, right, family relations with people who are either not keeping the Shabbat or secular or non-Jewish. And communication is very important, but also very important to be able to be strong in what my own needs are. If someone was, and I've used this analogy before, if someone is allergic, everyone is very sensitive to them. Someone says, we can't have peanuts in the room, you won't have peanuts in the room. It's not like, oh, well, you have your limitations. No, you cannot have because I'm allergic. So if we say to someone, in the same way, please, I'm not telling you what to do, but I need this for myself, then that is the basis of a conversation. But then afterwards, what is the right atmosphere and what should I be saying no to and what should I be saying yes to on Shabbat? Just imagine that you are me. I don't think there's any difference between me and you in keeping Shabbat, right? So I would never set a birthday party for any of my kids my kids have secular friends. They wouldn't have a birthday party on Shabbat because they understand, or they can have a picnic outside. But they won't have it will be very clear what is, but also my kids don't have time for that on Shabbat. Because we go to the synagogue, we come home, we have a family meal, we have time in which we're together, we have lots of guests. So it's not what do I do with my free time, because it's what do I do in order to create the Shabbat atmosphere. So I took a long time answering that, but I think it applies to some of the questions here. Now I'm going to go. You can stop me at any time if I make sense or I get you very angry at what I'm saying. That's also okay. You can just start yelling at me if you want. But I hope I'm helping you here. Okay. Living Jewish life in the diaspora. How are Jews in the diaspora expected to live a Jewish life when synagogues are far away and living close to one is not financially possible? Um, Very good question, right? I'm just reading out the questions that were put together here. Thank you, Nigel, for putting them together. Um, so we have an issue. We have an issue which is not intended. When we talk about synagogues in many places in Europe, but for sure in the Nordic communities, it was not set that the synagogues would be in a place which are financially expensive. This was not how it was set, right? It was set at whatever location was central for the Jewish community at the time. In Malmö, it was set at the outskirts of the town, right? Which was the outskirts of the town at the time. And that worked for many Jews who could probably find cheaper housing in that area. When we talk about communities and when they were set, these were all set as Orthodox communities, so they all had in mind how are people going to walk to shul. They all had that in mind when they were buying a building, and sometimes it also had to do with limitations of the law, which were sometimes anti-Semitic. Where are Jews allowed to live? Is right. It depends how far back in Europe you go, but for sure, in certain areas, we know that we had designated areas called ghettos, which go back way before the Second World War, and where Jews are allowed to live or not was set by that. So it's not always a question of choice, or it's a question of changed circumstances. Um, so the question is a very good question. How are you expected to live a Jewish life when synagogues are far away? And I think there's no good answer to that, because the answer is it's not a good situation. So either you need to give up on something in order to prioritize living close to the synagogue, or maybe you have to find solutions in which you can be spending more time around the synagogues. So if you have friends who live nearby, to spend the Shabbat meal with them and then afterwards walk back home, maybe even staying occasionally at a hotel, which is close by. I don't know the circumstances for each person, but for sure, living far away makes it very difficult because of the amount of time you're going to be walking, the amount of time you're going to be spending not being at the synagogue itself, and also that distance creates for you. We don't have a magic solution. A magic solution would be for me to tell you, okay, you know what? Why don't you drive on Shabbat because it's more important for you to be at shul. The conservative movement many times says that. We don't. We don't change the Torah in order to make it work because the circumstances are difficult. But I definitely understand the question. I don't know if I've helped with this answer, but many times, if Shabbat becomes important enough, I think going back to the previous question as well, the more Shabbat becomes important and central in my life, the more I will set my priorities accordingly. So it's not that I make Shabbat work. Shabbat becomes the center and the priority of my decision making. And many times we have questions of priorities when we're talking about living conditions, where we're living, etc. And I've seen people in the different communities who've said, not because the rabbi has told them so, but realized it's not working, to set their priorities and find a way somehow to move from an hour distance to 20 minutes walking distance so that and sometimes you have to work hard or wait list, but it means it becomes a priority in your life to get yourself on such a list so that you can really be onto it because it's a priority for you, so that you don't have this very difficult situation of walking over an hour in the winter when it's cold and rainy or snowing, etc. Okay. 1B, living Jewish life in the diaspora with small children. What are Jews with small children supposed to do on Shabbat and Chag if they live at such a distance from distance that it's not possible for the children to walk, even though it is for the parents? Okay, this is a follow-up to the previous question. So once a child is old enough to walk on his or her own, then there are solutions halachically in which it could be possible either to carry a child or to mutually carry a child. Once, because if the child can walk on his own, then even carrying them is only the Rabbanan. It's not something which is right from the Torah, and therefore we can find solutions when it is necessary. I will say that many times there is. One can also ask themselves, of course, there's a priority. You want your children to be a part of the synagogue. It's very important for their spiritual development. On the other hand, um, many times, right, when you have small children, you might spend more time, or one of the parents will be at home with the small child or with the baby so that the other one can fully enjoy, and you can take turns on that. There's not much you can do. But it's not so different than living a Jewish life in the in other communities. I would say like this. I would say that it's a privilege to see that here in this group and in general, women are very active and actively going to shul. In many Orthodox communities, because of the issue with children, the woman will stay at home. And if you're having 5, 6, 7 kids or 8 kids or whatever, then you end up with the mother being at home a lot of the time. And that's her own mitzvah to the upbringing of the children. And don't forget that that is very important. And then the children will be taught to pray, and the mother will be teaching them Torah when they are at home during the Shabbat morning, when the father is gone, for example. So that is something normal. But I think it's wonderful that you want to come with your kids to the synagogue. But then that is a question of the balance. If the child is not able to carry himself, then then we can't find a solution to take him. It goes back to our different relation to from last week in terms of eruv, and what is something called public domain, or only somewhere in between. There could be some rabbis who would permit a stroller being pushed. I'm not going to say that here it's allowed. I'm saying you have to ask your own rabbi what his own halachic giving for your community is on that, because it's a strain between we want the kids to come. It's not something deoraita. It's not prohibited by the Torah. Perhaps it's not reshut harabim. It's not a public domain, and therefore can it be permissible? Yes. After the child is able to walk on his own, for sure. Younger than that, we would need to ask our rabbi. I'm going to go forward because I have 21 questions here, and I've gotten through one. So let me go ahead. Balancing Shabbat with secular friendships, I think we've answered, or I've tried to answer, that it's really a question of prioritization and your own spiritual atmosphere that you want to create, and how that works with your own friendships, and that's very personal and up to you. But I've tried to tell you, give you my take on that. Same following, balancing Jewish life with a non-Jewish or secular family. Okay, so I've actually answered a couple of them. Lighting Shabbat candles without a bracha. I'm just going to read out the question. If a woman lights Shabbat candles without saying the bracha, for example, in order to attend mincha before Kabbalat Shabbat, does it still count as a mitzvah? If so, why? Is it a mitzvah defined by both the act of lighting and the recitation of the bracha? Okay. So in the summer, just explain the question. In the summer, we can end up with a situation as follows. The Shabbat time, if you look on just on a calendar, on a digital calendar, you'll see that Shabbat begins at 8:20, for example. And the community will have Kabbalat Shabbat at 6:30. How is that? Because we have a specific time, which is the earliest that we can actually bring in the Shabbat, which is much earlier than when the Shabbat actually starts. If you say I want to start Shabbat earlier because it's so late in the Nordic countries, so what is the earliest? And we have a very clear calculation of how to set what is called that half day of the half noon of the half day, but we won't get into it right now. Okay, it's called Plaga Mincha. That is the earliest time. which means that you might see Chabad has a calendar that says Kabbalat Shabbat is 8:30, and some of your community is doing it at 6:45. How is that possible? That's how it's possible. Okay. However, before that time, it's not allowed to light candles. That's the first time when you can light the candles with the bracha. Okay. Now, if someone, let's say you have the synagogue which is starting the Mincha and Kabbalat Shabbat at 6:45, and you need to walk 15 minutes in order to get there on time for Kabbalat Shabbat. So you end up lighting beforehand. It creates a problem. I think I don't know the directive that different rabbis have given, but the problem raised here is true. The woman should be lighting the Shabbat candles with a bracha. That is her main mitzvah. And she shouldn't be lighting beforehand. I don't think it's a good solution to light beforehand. Maybe it's a good solution to ask the community to make Kabbalat Shabbat 15 minutes later or 20 minutes later so that you can light and still manage to get there, so that you only miss Mincha and not Kabbalat Shabbat. I think it's not a good solution to light before and light without a bracha, because as the question is raised here, it's not keeping the mitzvah properly, even though the mitzvah itself is to have candle lights on when you come home, so that it is a mitzvah in that sense that you are lighting the candles. But I think it's very important to make the bracha as well. So maybe you can ask your community to make it a bit later if possible. Another point on this that just came to mind is that if you're going to shul and then you're going to friends, or having a community meal, you should use candles at home which will still be lit when you come home. So you can get these 8-hour ones, 12-hour ones that will keep, because when you come home, you should be able to the light should be on in the home. It's the shalom of the house, and you should have it. It is also possible to light candles where one will be eating, but then still make sure you have an electric light. So another solution can be to turn on an electric light, of course not with a bracha, so that you have light at the home. Then walk to the community and light at the community or at the shul. Okay, and then that is also possible, and then that might be a better solution as well. Okay, so I just gave you two solutions. Okay, number 5. I'm just in a monologue here, so if anyone has anything, just tell me. Can someone say that you hear me and that I'm doing okay? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Automatic lights in apartment buildings. This is a tough one. How should one deal with lights that turn on automatically in apartment buildings, such as lights between floors? Along similar lines, how should electric keys or key cards used for gates or building entrances be handled on Shabbat? This is getting more and more difficult because the modernization and technology that we have in our countries is getting more and more problematic in this sense. Okay, so let's take it like this. First of all, one can talk about what one has control over. And what I have control over, for sure, I should not be using any electric motion inside my home. I mean, when the community in Malmö renovated the building now, so I had them install 2 different electric systems. One which is for the entire week, which is based on motion sensors, and then another one which is manual electricity. And the security knows that when Shabbat begins and they know they have the luach, that they switch the system. Okay? So one should have that at home as well. You should not, anything that you do should not be turning on anything electric on the Shabbat. So that's point number 1. Point number two is what do I not control or what can I control? Okay, and the fact is that if I have a reality, let's say if I have a choice and I'm moving to an apartment and I have two apartments to choose from, it would be better to choose one that does not have electric sensors, right? So that we're talking about priority again, as I said before, setting Shabbat as a top priority in my life. So I have two apartments. I like one of them better. One of them has electric sensors and the other one does not. Okay? So um, I should actually think of that. When I have two refrigerators that I want to buy, one of them has a bulb that I can take out, and the other one does not. Though, so there is a good choice to make to choose one and to think of Shabbat. It's honoring the Shabbat, it's respecting the Shabbat, and it's part of the decisions that I learned to begin making. Okay, so that is what I say, what I have control over. Same with a hotel. If I'm going on a vacation or on a business trip and I'm going to a hotel, me personally, I can spend a lot of time trying to find one which has a manual locks. And you can actually call up a hotel and the second you start asking the questions, they say, "Oh, we've heard that before." Right? Because you're not the first one who's been asking these questions. I'll give you a funny example. I was there's a hotel in Vienna, and the first time I was there the first time I was there was not on Shabbat, and I noticed they had manual lights and they had manual electric keys, manual keys, not electric. So I said, great, if I ever come here for Shabbat, then this is where I'm going to come. When I was there for Shabbat, it's actually the oldest hotel in Vienna. It's been running since, I think, 1600 till this day. Still have the horse stables outside, and many great rabbis stayed at this hotel. Many famous rabbis, such as the Chafetz Chaim and the Chabad rabbis 100 years ago stayed at this hotel. So it's very special when I learned this. So it was very funny because when I started asking these questions, they immediately knew. They said, no, we have no issue. When I come here on Shabbat, and they had an electric door installed at the entrance, just to stop, so, so then I said, what am I going to do? So the simple solution would be, so I come downstairs and I wait for someone who's going out anyway. Okay. The name of the hotel is Hotel Stephanie. And I said, okay, I'll just wait for someone non-Jewish to walk towards the door, and then it will open for them, and then I can go out as well. Right? Simple solution. I went down and I see the hotel doorman. He sees me, and he has already gotten in place, and he walks out nonchalantly as if he's not walking out for me, takes a look out on the street, and opens the door so that he's not opening it for me. So someone told him the halachot of Shabbat, right, in a very interesting way. And I thought it was a mistake, but then it happened every time. So he's like walking out, looking outside. Oh, is someone coming? And he's not doing it for me. So it was a very funny circumstance. But in terms of electricity, I'll go back to that as a solution. The best would be if you're in a situation which you have sensors, could you walk up or wait for someone else to arrive, right? And then the lights are going on for them as they walk up. So that's a good solution. If they're walking outside, walking towards the building, then it goes on. If this is not possible, at the end you need to live, right? This is your reality, which might not be the best, but it is what it is. So therefore, we can then break it down and we can say that electricity today, as you learned a couple of weeks ago, is not deoraita, right? We're not lighting anything. And the more advanced systems are actually using LED, which is not really a light in the halachic sense at all. So, okay, when you turn on the automatic sensor, you're not doing anything yourself. It's happening automatically by something that you have triggered, but it's not something that you have done. It's done by the fact that you are there, and it's not something that you want. Putting all of that together, and I say this carefully, means that if you have no other solution, then it's not, then it would be permissible, not great, but permissible. Okay? Regarding and I say this very carefully because I'm talking about the reality that some of you are living in. It's not great, and it's preferable not to be in that, but it's not an actual prohibition of the Shabbat, but it's not great to be doing so. And I say my words carefully. Okay? Adding on to this, electric door, that in itself is problematic because I'm actually taking the action myself. I'm taking a card and using it myself in order, which turns on a light, which then opens the door. So I'm taking action in order to open it. Different solutions. If it's your own apartment, find a way to fix it. I mean, stick some toilet paper in the doorknob before you leave. I don't know. Find some way to fix it, and so that you're not, so you can, and there's different, you can find a way to stick another card in so that it just remains open a little bit. If you're in a hotel, then if you set in advance and you tell and you explain to the non-Jewish person your issue, then they can open the door for you when you come in. And again, since it's not the Oraita, so you're going to be learning about non-Jewish soon. Someone doing non-Jewish should not be doing melachot for you on Shabbat, but in the case of a necessity, and the case that it's set in advance and it's not Doraita, it would be allowed. So you can go to a hotel room and tell them, when I come in, I'm going to need your help because of Shabbat, to open the door. Since again, it's a necessity and it's not a milacha and it's not Doraita and it's something which you have no, but if you could choose and find another hotel, that would be better. Okay, number 6, refrigerator lights that cannot be disabled. Okay, how should one deal with a refrigerator light that cannot be turned off? It is permissible to use the fridge on Shabbat and Yom Tov despite this, even if it is not ideal. Okay, you're making my life very difficult, this shiur. Good questions. Almost every fridge can be disabled. The reason is that you have a tab inside the fridge, okay, that is what opens the light when you open the fridge. So you can tape that tab and the fridge light and it won't be affected, okay? You can give it a try. 90% of the time, that is the case. In maybe new refrigerators, okay, then it could be that you don't have that tab, and that is again a sensor. Maybe you can find where the sensor is and cover it. Give it a try. Find a way so that some of them you can even put a magnet on, and then the light won't go on. Some systems, it's very interesting. If you're buying a new refrigerator, Sharp, the company Sharp, has integrated in its system, even in when they're selling refrigerators outside of Israel, they have a method to turn off the lights for 24 hours or 48 hours, which was set by the company, by rabbis for Shabbat and Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov you end up with 48 hours, right? If you have 2 days. So sometimes you can even have an integrated system. Look it up online. I didn't make it up. So it could be that you have a system in your refrigerator. If everything that I said does not work, then I would say 2 things. First of all, if it's a normal lamp, then that is a problem because you're actually turning the light on. If it's LED, then maybe it's less problematic. It's not like a real light in terms of electricity and how it works, but you're still turning it on. Again, you're not turning it on to get because you want to, but rather you want to get the food and not turn on the light. When we learn Hilchot Shabbat, we learn that it really is important. What is my intention? And here my intention, I don't want to turn on the light in the same way that I don't want to turn on the light in the apartment building. I just want to get home. So that intention is important. It's the Rabbanan. Ask your rabbi what to do, but it could be that if you don't have a possibility of buying a new refrigerator, then if you did it by accident and it's a LED light, don't worry about it. Okay? You did it by accident, you open the door, let it close by itself. I've seen people put towels on doors when it happens by mistake. Then you're destroying all your food, and the whole Shabbat you're going to be worried about the food that you're destroying. Don't do that, okay? Let it close by itself. You didn't intend it, and it's just a LED light. Can you open it up knowingly? Perhaps. If you have no other way about it. But as I said, 90% of the time, there is a solution. You just have to think about it in advance. The same thing goes to vacation. Vacation takes a lot of planning. If you're going to be going for Shabbat or spending a month in Greece or Italy, what does the apartment look like? What does the refrigerator look like? What do the lights look like? How is the entrance? And like we talked about last week, we talked about the Eruv. Is there a courtyard around the house so that you can actually enjoy and have a coffee and be reading a book? You're going all the way to Italy to enjoy the sun, and then you can't go out of the house with your book on Shabbat because there's no Eruv. So it's a new type of planning. I've asked very strange questions on booking.com that wait, do you have a courtyard? Is it completely closed? Is it this and this? And maybe just because I have a good rating there, they don't just say no, that's also something just in terms of derech eretz, to remember that you represent more than yourself in any interaction in the world, including when you go on vacation, right? If you're coming and asking questions, do it politely. Okay, so that is something to think about. Taking out trash on Shabbat. How far from one's home is it permissible to take out trash on Shabbat? Simple answer. If there's no eruv, you cannot take the trash out. You can put it in a double bag, or if it's within the courtyard, then that is okay because that is within the eruv. If it is within the building, of course it's okay. Some buildings have a double, you have a way from the outside and from the inside, but also maybe you can take it downstairs to the cellar or something so that it's not bothersome to you. But no, you cannot carry your trash outside into the public domain on the Shabbat. So that's a very good point. But find a solution, right? The solution is not to violate the Shabbat. The solution is to think of things in advance. Empty your trash on the Shabbat. Empty your trash after Shabbat. Use a double bag if you need to. Put it in your second spare bathroom if you need to, or in the cellar in the building, or these are things when you think about suddenly you think in a different way when you're thinking of moving. Wait, where's the trash? Is it inside the building or is it outside? Okay, so that's on that. Carrying within apartment complexes. Okay, this is a very complex question. Because if we wanted to make an eruv like we talked about last week, we said it's a very good question. I'm glad someone listened to the shiur last week. What we said, we have an eruv, which is creating the private domain for the city, for example, like we would have in Yerushalayim, Bnei Brak. We talked about Amsterdam, but also we have this idea within our own complex. Like I showed you the picture last week, right? So you have different courtyards, and then they come to a courtyard, a joint courtyard, and we said you would need to do what is called eruv chatzerot, right? A courtyard eruv, to have a shared meal with each other. So that would be the same case if I'm living within an apartment where there's no eruv around, right? So we don't have an eruv connecting the whole city as a private complex. Then I have my own, even within my own apartment building. So I'm going from my private domain to a joint domain, which is the hallway, and then to another apartment. I should do eruv chatzerot, okay, which is a very simple, you can find it in the Siddur or ask your rabbi how to do it. If I want to be sharing my meal with another family, because I'm carrying my food from my apartment to theirs. But it becomes difficult because actually eruv chatzirot means that I have to include all of the neighbors. So what if some of them are non-Jewish? And what if the apartment is owned by a non-Jew? Or on the opposite, if the whole apartment building is owned by a Jew, do I still need it? complex questions you need to ask your rabbi. I won't have time to answer, but I hope that this has given you a good direction. I hope I'm doing better than ChatGPT because I told you I would do, but I'm trying to give answers and not just and give you like the um, like sort of behind the scenes. Accidentally turning off lights on Shabbat. What should you do if you accidentally turn off the bathroom light on Shabbat and there are no windows for light? This may be manageable at home, but what if you're visiting someone else who is also Shomer Shabbat? It is permissible to turn the light back on indirectly, for example, with an elbow. Should one try to do so discreetly? Okay, very good question, and the way that the question was put as well. So you, whoever asked this question is 100% right, that if I need to do a melacha on Shabbat, I should do it indirectly. For example, we even have this in the army. You're in the army, you have to do a melacha on Shabbat, but then can you do it not directly and indirectly so that it doesn't have the full intention of the melacha on Shabbat? So this is a basic principle in terms of the melachot on Shabbat. However, just because something is uncomfortable doesn't mean that I can do the melacha even indirectly. So if I turn the bathroom light off, it's going to remain off. I can't turn it back on just because it's uncomfortable. There's no direct need. It's just uncomfortable. Uncomfortable does not allow me to do a melacha on the Shabbat. Even though I told you that the lights themselves today are maybe LED and maybe not proper electricity, but we won't do that on the Shabbat. I mean, if someone else turns on the light for me, then I can that if someone else does a melacha for me on the Shabbat, it's problematic. But if someone turns on the light or turns on the air conditioning, and they are violating the Shabbat by doing so, I can only enjoy it if it was possible to manage without it. In other words, if I'm in a room so cold that I cannot manage without the air conditioner, it would actually be problematic to me to enjoy the violation of someone who is Jewish. Um, um, so, um, so that in itself is problematic. I cannot violate the Shabbat by turning on the light, even if I turned it off by mistake. Okay? Um, okay, I'm just going to go forward. Rabbis working on Shabbat. How is it permissible for rabbis to work on Shabbat? While their actions may not violate malachot, does their synagogue role still count as work? As a follow-up, is it permissible to give a Torah class on Shabbat and receive payment afterwards? We assume this is not allowed, but it seems related to the responsibilities of community rabbis on Shabbat. Okay, so I'm going to take this question and throw it back at you. Can you work in a hotel on Shabbat? Can one work in a hotel? If the hotel is keeping Shabbat, can I work on the Shabbat? The answer is no. So how do I do it? I can only do it if it's within the larger salary that one is receiving, so that it's not a direct salary being given on the Shabbat itself for specific hours. Okay? I can also set up my contract so that, let's say I work on Shabbat and that the hours before Shabbat I'm getting double pay so that I'm not getting paid on the Shabbat themselves. Regarding community rabbis, I don't think any rabbi makes any benefit off of the Shabbat. We work hardest on Shabbat and don't get paid for it. We have a general salary that we receive for the community, and we never get paid extra, even though the work is double load or 3 times or whatever on the Shabbat itself. But it's a general salary. So if you have a contract and you're working generally, and it also includes the Shabbat, that would be fine. If you have a contract which specifically says you're working on the Shabbat and getting paid for hours on the Shabbat, that's problematic. I think it's very problematic, the fact that you have Jewish staff working in hotels on Shabbat. And getting paid per hour unless it's fixed by a rabbi. So that when you say hashgacha, when you have a mashgiach and supervision of a hotel, it's not only over the food, but it's over these issues as well. And yes, in general, I think it's very different between a community rabbi, who that's the spiritual what he's doing on the Shabbat is definitely serving the purpose of the Shabbat than someone working on Shabbat, which is violating the Shabbat. The whole idea is that we rest on Shabbat. So for me to go to a hotel and enjoy the fact that Jewish staff are working there on the Shabbat instead of resting on Shabbat, I think that that is problematic. I know that it's done, but I think it is not the intention of Shabbat itself. Of course, there's ways to work around it, but I think there's a big difference between a hospital where you have staff working on the Shabbat and a hotel where people are just going to enjoy, and how that is set up. Is it preferable to have non-Jewish staff working on the Shabbat? For sure. They don't have the mitzvah of Shabbat. So they can be benefiting and maybe even getting a nicer salary on the Shabbat. Many cases, this is how it's run. But then you're going to also have a shiur on what is it they're allowed to do. They can't be connecting the platot on Shabbat morning, right? They need to have everything set in advance. They can't be cooking for you on the Shabbat. They have to have the food cooked in advance. A non-Jew is not allowed to cook or do any melacha for you on the Shabbat, even though he or she does not need to keep the Shabbat. And that's a separate shiur that you will have. Okay. Food cooked unintentionally after Shabbat. If most of your food finishes cooking only after Shabbat ends by accident, is it still permitted to eat it? Okay, so basically you have put chicken in the oven, right? And the chicken is not ready yet, and you're lighting candles for Shabbat. What do you do? Right? Can you leave the oven on and then it turns off, or can you put it on the platter when it's not completely cooked? The answer is yes. Okay, as long as it's partially cooked, you are not touching or changing the settings on the oven, then that can be done. There are specific halachot if you wanted to leave the oven on the timer, for example, to make sure that you're not that you cover the buttons so that you're not because it's very well understood in the Talmud that burning the food is very sensitive, and then even without noticing, you're going to start playing with the temperature or something. I mean, then they're talking about the oven. If you have a open fire on the Shabbat, then you need to cover it so that you're not unintentionally start adding it or messing around. Of course, it's best to have the food prepared before the Shabbat. If it's a plata, I think it's much less problematic. So your food is not ready. If you have a hot plata that will continue cooking it, then you can put it and cover it. The plata doesn't have any buttons that you can be touching, so that can be fine. Okay. Carrying medicine on Shabbat. Would it count as muktzeh if one applies sunscreen before exiting their house on Shabbat? Is it permissible to bring medicine and sunscreen to the synagogue given that the person will be very sick without it? Okay, two separate questions here. Would it count as muktzeh if one applies sunscreen? Muktzeh, as we said, is something which is which the term here is not correct, because muktzeh is something I cannot move on the Shabbat, and it should be put aside before. Here, you're applying sunscreen to yourself before the Shabbat. It's no issue because it's something which is necessary for you on the Shabbat. Putting the sunscreen itself and how to apply it on the Shabbat itself is a separate question that we won't get into now, but to put it on before the Shabbat is not a problem at all, and therefore it is a part of you that you are, it's applied already, so it's not muktzeh. Is it permissible to bring medicine and sunscreen to the synagogue given that the person would be very sick without it? So I brought this up last week. If one has in the same way that we could have a key and a way to carry it as part of a clothing, it could be that one can add it somehow so that it's not considered carrying, but it's not the best. What would be if you can have extra medicine and you're walking 20 minutes to add that to have some extra medicine at the synagogue that you can take there would have been, of course, be better than having to carry it. But if it's life threatening, then it would be allowed. But I want to be careful of saying life threatening. Well, like we've said a few times this shiur, what is not comfortable is not life threatening. Okay, the fact that I need something or I am used to something does not mean it's life threatening. So I want to be very careful when we use the terms. Okay, I find it difficult that sunscreen, not putting on sunscreen, if I put it on 10 minutes before, and then I'm walking to, maybe in specific medical conditions, that could be the case. But in most cases, it could be uncomfortable. So it might be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that it's life-threatening. So we should be careful with the terms that we're using, and then accordingly, we find the solution. So I have now gotten through 13 of the questions, and our time has run up. So maybe we continue, or I pass them on to, I think, Rav Yoav will be teaching next week, and I will pass them on to add that he can answer them in next week's shiur, because I myself also have to go now. But I hope I was helpful. I didn't have a chance to look at the chat at all. I was just like going through. Okay, doing awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, public toilets on Shabbat, sensors for hand washing. Yeah, it's very, again, the new world that we're living in. Yes, this is very problematic. It's different than the lights. You're hand washing, you're actually starting up a machine, right, by now, and all of that is very problematic on the Shabbat. Using a public toilet on Shabbat could be definitely problematic, more so than in the past. And like, what do you do, and it's a very interesting question. But let's continue Bezrat Hashem next week. I hope this was helpful to you and not too much at one time.